Hi, my name is Paul Sloan. I'm the Associate Professor of Early Christianity at Houston Christian University, and I've actually been living here in Houston for the past, 9 or so years. Here with my wife, Megan, and our 3 kiddos, so it's been a lot of fun. It's nice to be here with you today.
Dr. Paul Sloan. Paul, good to see you. Welcome. Your first appearance on Exegetically Speaking.
That's right. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's exciting. We're going to be talking in a minute about 1 Corinthians 9. But before we do that, let's help people find out a little bit more about you. How did you get started reading Greek?
I started reading Greek in undergrad. I did my undergrad degree at Baylor University, and I did the program called University Scholars, which is kind of their sort of honors program. So it wasn't a requirement. It was just I knew that I wanted to read New Testament and get into theology, and so I knew that Greek would be necessary for that. I took a lot of semesters of Greek. I took some Latin as well. I had taken Latin in high school, and then I took a year or so at Baylor, but then my freshman year I started Greek, and then basically just never stopped. It was
So in your master's degree?
Master's degree, it was a part of it, not as a class, but just as a part of just was assumed that I'd be working with Greek. And then in one of my masters required that I take Hebrew. So that's when I picked up Hebrew in my master's. Yeah.
And that's probably helped you in other ways.
In other areas, yes. I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading on Torah and its reception, and so that's required Hebrew.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, so let's turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 21. This is a really interesting passage for a lot of reasons, and you've got a very interesting reading of this passage. Let me read it first of all. This is 1 Corinthians 9:21. I'm going to read it in the English Standard Version, and then I want to talk a little bit about how you now read that particular text. To those outside the law, Paul writes, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. Okay. You don't get that reading out of this text, do you?
I don't. That's not quite how I see it. There's a few things at stake here, and I'll get to how I take verse 21 in just a minute. I think probably the basic idea that I think is governing this passage that will then help understand sort of my translation of it in verse 21 is that there's a widespread idea in Jewish literature from the 2nd century BC on into rabbinics in which a person, if they've been sent on a mission or a commandment, or if they are engaged in a mission or a commandment, then these texts say that that person who is so engaged is exempt from other commandments that might hinder the completion of their mission or of their duty.
So the mission becomes number one.
The mission becomes number one, or the commissioned mitzvah, the commissioned commandment becomes the overriding, the superordinated duty, such that other commandments are subordinated to it. And the important part there is the example probably easiest is from, granted this text is later than the New Testament, it's from Mishnah Sukkah 2:4, and there they're talking about the obligation to sleep in a sukkah per Leviticus 23, and it's talking about people who are exempt from this mitzvah, exempt from this requirement to sleep in a sukkah. And the line they say is, one who is sent on a commandment is exempt from the commandment of sukkah. So if you've been sent to perform some duty, a mitzvah that is of higher importance, then if sleeping in a sukkah were to hinder you from fulfilling that other duty, then you'd be exempt from sleeping in the sukkah.
So that becomes kind of a standard that by which other commandments are judged and understood.
That's right. So in that way of phrasing it, now the phrase itself, as far as I know, doesn't appear till the Mishnah and later, but the concept of it is present, like I said, in 2nd century BC texts and onward. But the basic idea is that, yes, the commandment you've been sent upon is the superordinated duty, and so that a person so engaged is exempt from other commandments that might hinder the completion of that task. So like another example is from Mishnah Barakot 3, where it says a person who is about to bury his relative is exempt from saying the Shema, from donning tefillin, and from the daily prayer that they said. And it goes on and gives other examples. And this becomes a common formula that a person who's doing duty X is exempt from duties A, B, and C that might hinder the completion of duty X. Right.
So a fellow couldn't bury his parents if he's taking care of these other
right.
things.
The
Or
logic
maybe
there
they'd
is
be
that
prohibited or
yes,
hindered at least in some way.
That's right, because the logic there was reciting the Shema required a certain amount of concentration, and you wouldn't be able to concentrate appropriately on reciting the Shema if you were busy doing something else, like burying your parents. And so they say, okay, the person who's burying his relative or whoever it is exempt from the duty to recite the Shema.
It sounds like then your consideration of this text is that Paul is thinking about that and
Yes.
he's working from that.
That's right. I think he's working with this premise, and the idea is that in 1 Corinthians 9, to go back to that text, he's presenting himself as an example, an exemplum, of a person who has certain rights based on his status, but that he doesn't always use these rights. So for him, it opens this exemplum in 9:1 with, am I not an apostle? And he goes on to talk about how, that Christ has sent me to do X, Y, Z, and therefore he has certain rights. He's got certain rights and privileges that come with his status as one who's been sent.
And commissioned directly by the
precisely
risen Jesus.
By the Messiah himself, right? So this is a very important duty. And then he contextualizes his adaptable practice by the claim that he's been commissioned. And so in 9:20 to 22, he's talking about how, though I'm free, I've made myself a slave to all, and so that when I'm with the Jews, I behave as a Jew. When I'm with those who are, as the ESV said, outside the law, I behave as one of those, etc. All with the purpose of winning these people. And he talks about his commission duty as this thing that has absolutely been laid upon him. He says, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. A burden has been laid upon me.
That's right.
I must complete my commission task. I'm not doing this
You
voluntarily.
see that in Romans 1 too as well.
I'm obligated to all people, precisely. It's
Yeah,
basic to his apostolic status. I'm commissioned. This is my duty. The Messiah has sent me. I've got to do this, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, the point for our purposes, that becomes his superordinated duty, to which all other things are subordinated. And importantly, not because he thinks the commandments are unimportant now, but simply because any commandment that might hinder the completion of his mission can be subordinated because of the overriding import and urgency.
And this is not a mission that's going to retire at some point.
Right, not for Paul at least. Yeah, that's right, not for Paul.
He's going to have to keep at it. So let's go back to the text itself, the anamos, the tois anamos.
That's right.
As it begins, to those who are, on this translation, outside the law.
Right. Yeah, and ESV takes it as to those outside the law. Other passages, like the New American, say to those who are without the law. He becomes as one without the law. And so the idea is that's being conveyed by that translation is, well, to people who don't possess the law, I become as one who doesn't possess the law. Right? But then he goes on to say, though I am not without the law of God, using the same Greek term, meon anamos theou. The problem for me here is that these adjectives, the adjective anamos, doesn't mean, someone who doesn't possess the law. It almost exclusively means a person who transgresses the law, right? So the word animos or animoi, in its over 100 usages, in non-Pauline Jewish text means transgressor, to someone who transgresses X, Y, Z, or a sinner, or someone who's unrighteous, etc. Right? And so what I think Paul is saying is, to the transgressors, I become as a transgressor, though I am not transgressive with respect to God. He doesn't say I'm without the law of God. He says I am not transgressive with respect to God. Now the point is that with the English translation it says to those who are without the law as one without the law, though not being without the law of God, but in or under the law of Christ. And it makes it sound like there are multiple laws that Paul is dealing with, as if there are those over here who don't possess the law of Moses, and so I act like one who doesn't possess the law of Moses. But then he's quick to clarify that, but I'm not without the law of God because I am in or under Christ's law. So it makes it sound like there's Christ's law over here that Paul is subservient to, and that that's distinct from the law of Moses. And my point is that's actually, in my view, at least based on a mistranslation here of animos, what he's saying is to those who transgress the law of Moses, I become as one who transgress it, but I'm not transgressive with respect to God, but I am, and that it's translated, I am in or under the law of Christ. But
Right.
what Paul says is I am enamos Christou,
Yeah.
which means I'm lawful with respect to the Messiah. In other words, he's saying, look, when I appear transgressive to the law of Moses, that's only because I'm among other transgressors, but I'm actually behaving lawfully with respect to the law of Moses because of Christ, or with respect to Christ because Christ has commissioned me on this duty.
That's fascinating. Now, enemos, what you're suggesting here is that he is lawful.
That's right.
And there's not two different laws.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Right. It's like
Right.
there's the law of Moses over here and the law of Christ.
Right.
Something separate.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, enemos is just an adjective, and a common one at that. It almost always means lawful or ordained or permissible or legal. And so what he's saying is I'm acting lawfully or permissibly with respect to the Messiah because the Messiah has commissioned me for this duty. The irony here is he's actually asserting his conformity to the law of Moses, so that when he appears transgressive, he's not, because he's actually acting lawfully because of the duty that he's been commissioned to. Yeah.
Which means he is to set aside some other mitzvah in order to pursue this mission.
Right. When there's a hindrance. And
When
there
there's
won't
a
always be
hindrance.
one. Yeah.
There's not always one. And finally, he says, with that purpose clause, in order that I might win those who are lawless.
Right. The transgressors. I'm trying to win the transgressors
yeah.
over. And so
Yeah.
I'm going to comport myself like them to some degree. And that when others see that, they might think I'm transgressing, but no, I'm just leaving certain commandments unfulfilled out of my superordinated duty
That's
to
a
preach.
fascinating reading of this text.
Okay.
And for this particular reading, you actually earned an award.
That's right. The 2025 Ochtemeyer Award that SBL gives for
Paul
New
J.
Testament scholarship.
Ochtemeyer.
That's right. Yeah.
A stalwart, incredible reader of Paul and other New Testament texts. Congratulations.
Thank
on
you. I
that.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Hope you come back and be with us again.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. What an interesting and compelling reading of 1 Corinthians 9:21. Now, you too can read these texts in their original languages like Paul Sloan. Take up the study of Greek or Hebrew, or maybe even both. Come on, you know you want to. Follow the links in the show notes to see how you can become an exegete like Paul Sloan. This podcast comes to you courtesy of the good people at Wheaton College and the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center. Our audio engineer is Kathy Capes. Our intro and outro music is by Phil Keggy. Our Wheaton-based staff, Jesse Dugan, Rebecca Larson, and John Lonsma. Thanks to you all. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and rate us highly. Comment or ask a question in the comment section of the platform where you get your podcast. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.